All right, let's just dive right into this. We're exploring an incredibly fascinating explainer today that builds a literal mathematical bridge between deep, ancient spiritual introspection and the mind-bending, multidimensional math of theoretical physics. We are digging into a highly complex research paper from a series known as the Buddhist E8 correspondence. And what it attempts to do is honestly nothing short of revolutionary. It proposes that the structure of human consciousness isn't just some random biological accident. No, it argues that the mind is strictly bound by the geometric fabric of the universe itself.
We're delving into a theoretical framework that asks a massive, almost sci-fi level question. What if the ancient Buddhist map of the mind and cutting-edge quantum algebra are actually describing the exact same structure? Think about it. On one hand, you have the classical Theravāda Abhidhamma, this highly systematic, incredibly detailed psychological framework developed centuries ago by Pali scholars to map out every single state of consciousness. And then, on the other hand, you have modern theoretical physicists using exceptional algebra and multidimensional spaces to model fundamental reality. This paper makes the bold claim that these two seemingly completely opposite disciplines are in fact looking at the exact same geometric object. So let's kick things off with a mind, specifically with a very important number, 52. In classical Theravāda Abhidhamma, every single moment of human consciousness, what they call a chitta, isn't just a single monolithic experience. It's actually a composite. Think of it like a vector made up of a baseline awareness plus a very specific subset of mental factors. The ancients rigorously defined every possible mental factor that can ever arise in a human mind, and they counted exactly 52 of them. These are known as the 52 Cetasikas. What's brilliant is how this framework categorizes the mind, breaking it all down into those 52 distinct pieces. You've got 7 universals, which are baseline perceptions present in absolutely every single moment of consciousness. Then there are 6 particulars, which are optional. You also have 14 unwholesome factors like greed and hatred, and 19 beautiful factors like mindfulness, plus a few higher-order categories for things like wisdom and compassion. Basically, every feeling, every thought you have is theoretically just a specific recipe made out of these exact 52 ingredients. Okay, so let's flip the script to our second pillar, the exceptional Jordan algebra. This represents a mind-boggling 27-dimensional mathematical space. Physicists use exceptional Lie groups like E8 and F4, along with this specific Jordan algebra, to model the absolute baseline symmetries of particle physics and quantum field theory. It is a highly rigid, unchangeable mathematical structure governed by things called Octonionic matrices. So you're probably wondering, how on earth do we get from this massive abstract physics construct to ancient monks counting 52 mental factors? Well, let's look at the math and see how this builds. Researchers took this massive geometry and literally calculated an isolated observer layer. They started with the 29 visible channels that emerge from an 8-root lattice projection. Next, they applied a constraint that guarantees the continuous flow of time, something the ancient texts call the life faculty, and that drops the space down to 26 dimensions. Then, using something they call the jigsaw protocol, they mathematically truncated or peeled away the physical material interactions. It's kind of like carving all the unnecessary marble away from a sculpture. What they're left with is a purely internal coordinate space. And boom! That truncation leaves us with an 18-dimensional observer layer. This is absolutely crucial because this is the exact mathematical coordinate space where the internal observer exists within the model. According to the research, this specific 18-dimensional pocket is where cognition, emotion, attention, and ethical degrees of freedom dynamically operate. It is quite literally the geometric home of human consciousness. Here is where it gets absolutely incredible. The crucial point of this paper is that it directly maps those 52 ancient mental factors onto the specific bit patterns and geometry of those 18 dimensions. The researchers aren't just saying, oh, hey, this math is kind of like the mind. No, they are explicitly proving that the ancient polypsychological states map identically to the symmetry rules, eigenvalue shifts, and coordinate configurations of this 18-dimensional observer space. Let's break down exactly what this translation bridge looks like in practice.
Take Vedana, for example. That's the universal mental factor of feeling, our phenomenological valence. It's the baseline of whether something feels pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral to us. In the mathematical model, this is mapped directly to the Freudenthal cubic norm, which is a highly specific algebraic invariant used to measure topological shifts. The paper shows that human feeling isn't some arbitrary biological quirk. It is quite literally mapped to the mathematical shifts of this unique, nonlinear cubic norm within the exceptional algebra.
You really have to let this sink in for a second. A mathematical determinant expansion in this geometric space literally equals the human experience of joy. A contraction of that exact same space, that equals pain or displeasure. And if the space is perfectly preserved with zero shift, that translates mathematically to the human experience of equanimity. Our very feelings are being modeled as the volume of our internal 18-dimensional geometry, inflating and deflating. That is wild. And that brings us to another universal factor, sanya, or perception. This is the act of your mind recognizing a sensory pattern and slapping a label on it, like looking at a wooden object with 4 legs and instantly recognizing it as a chair. In the mathematical model, perception is algebraically defined as a specific F4 equivariant diagonalization map. What that means in plain English is that the abstract fluid geometry of the mind is forced to resolve into distinct mathematical eigenvalues, or recognizable labels. Your mind categorizes reality exactly the same way algebra diagonalizes a matrix.
Now, before we get to the physics of willpower, consider this striking historical definition from the Buddha, equating human volition directly with kamma, or action. He famously stated, "Volition I call kamma." Cetana, which is the mental factor of volition, is the core driver of our mental timeline. It's a push that forces the mind forward to take an action. So how does this abstract concept of human intention actually show up in 8-dimensional Octonionic algebra?
Well, mathematically, volition is the active generation of motion within the orbit. In the paper's framework, it explicitly applies derivation generators that traverse the imaginary units of the Octonian plane. To put it simply, your willpower, your intention, acts as the mathematical engine that drives continuous topological shifts across these Octonian coordinates. Intention is literally what generates movement in this geometric space.
We can even see this mapping when looking at the practice of meditation. The ancient texts describe vitakka as the initial strike of the mind onto an object, and vikara as the sustained anchoring of the mind to that object. Algebraically, vitakka translates to an impulsive mathematical projection right onto a target idempotent. Vikara is then a continuous gradient flow that minimizes geometric leakage, forcing the mind's coordinates to anchor tightly to that chosen target. It's literally the math of focus.
And the deeper you go, the more these other mental factors map just as cleanly. Mental energy, or virya, is mathematically modeled as a control gain that speeds up the rate at which the mind approaches a state. Rapture, or PT, acts as a positive valence reinforcement signal, a radial coordinate pushing the mind away from negative root modes. And aspiration, or chanda, is literally a directional tilt in the observer layer, physically leaning the geometric distribution towards specific configurations. Everything fits perfectly.
All of this incredible alignment builds up to the absolute climax of this explainer, theorem S2-3P, II, also known as the Cetasika classification theorem. Now, this is a profound philosophical statement disguised as a rigorous mathematical proof. The authors aren't just showing us a few neat coincidental similarities. They are formally proving a theorem about the absolute hard limits of the human mind.
The theorem definitively proves that the 52 ancient mental factors aren't just arbitrary labels that monks happen to come up with by chance. Rather, they are the absolute complete set of symmetry-consistent excitation patterns possible in this 18-dimensional space. Because of the exact rigid rules of this geometry, there are only exactly 52 ways this 18-dimensional observer layer can be configured. Think about that. The ancient monks somehow mapped out the exact mathematical limits of this space centuries ago. Furthermore, the theorem categorizes the ethics of these thoughts entirely as geometry and thermodynamics. Unwholesome thoughts, things like greed or delusion, are defined in the math as entropy-increasing deformations. They literally break symmetry and introduce topological leakage. Meanwhile, beautiful thoughts like mindfulness or compassion act mathematically as symmetry-restoring directions that align the mind with higher-order mathematical elegance. A beautiful thought is, quite literally, mathematically elegant.
So, what does this all mean for us? The ultimate takeaway of this explainer is a truly paradigm-shifting idea. Human mental complexity is not a random evolutionary accident. The reason we feel joy, pain, greed, and focus in the specific ways we do is because we are structurally bound by an absolute mathematical ceiling built right into the fabric of the universe. The exceptional Jordan algebra literally dictates what can and cannot be experienced.
I want to leave you with one final massive question to chew on.
We've seen how centuries of ancient introspective psychology align flawlessly with the rigorous limits of advanced theoretical physics. If our deepest feelings, our ethical choices, and our perception perfectly map to this exceptional algebra, is human consciousness ultimately just a shape navigating its way through 18-dimensional space? It's an incredible framework that totally redefines how we look at the universe inside our own heads. Thanks so much for exploring this with me.